Hiya, my discordant darlings. So, Gore. Like I said in my previous video, Gore is its own monster in the roleplay realms that I frequent. It's got quite a story behind it too. When I first started roleplaying in these rooms online, I considered myself a roleplayer. Funny enough, this term was actually considered derogatory in Gorean chat rooms. So, a bit of background. Gore is a fictional counter-Earth from the Sword and Sandals books of John Norman, a philosopher, that supposedly rotates on the opposite side of the sun on Earth's axis. These books were started as a sort of response to second-wave feminism. Gore is a world populated by many strange animals and plants, but also humans who were brought over to it by either the Priest Kings a long time ago, the Priest Kings being praying mantis-like, talking, all-knowing alien bug things, or Gorean humans, who, yeah, we'll get into that a little bit later, or a group of aliens called the Curry. These humans have formed similar cultural groups to those on Earth. There are Viking Goreans, Native American Goreans, Mongolian Goreans, Roman Goreans, African Goreans, Arab Goreans, etc., etc., etc. However, while there are slight cultural differences, for the most part, the overall culture of the world is the same. Typically, the people who are brought to Gore from Earth are mousy, repressed, quote-unquote, liberated modern women. And, quite frankly, his world would probably have the fur of almost any genuine feminist on end. The stories usually follow Tarl Cabot, one of the few men who have been brought to Gore from Earth. If they don't follow him, then they follow a woman, usually, who is taken as she learns about Gore through slavery. A funny note here is that, as almost a direct ripoff of John Carter of Mars, humans brought to Gore are supposedly stronger than they are on Earth because Gore has less gravity than Earth does. However, this seems to only be true of the men, as the women who are brought are supposedly no stronger than the local women. Kind of funny, huh? As interesting as the world is, it hurts my head sometimes. On Gore, the virgin-whore dichotomy is very real, except it's not a virgin-whore dichotomy, it's a frigid bitch, hot property dichotomy. There are, except for with a group called the Pawnee, two classes of women, free women and slaves. As a free woman, travel tends to be rather limited because you generally don't want to leave the confines of your city, town, etc., what they call a homestone, because it's a grand wild world out there, and if some wayward man who is not from where you are happens upon you and feels like you'd be a hot piece of ass, then he can collar you and make you exactly that. There are actually a lot of scenarios where free women can be collared, but they are usually not collared in their own cities unless it is as a punishment for a severe crime, or they beg for it, which happens on occasion. However, these times are often refused because, well, for various reasons. One reason might be because if you share a homestone, it could be considered a dishonor. Or if they just don't feel like training a free woman to be a slave. Anyway, back to Tarl Cabot. He is the son of a Gorean man who, I guess, had a baby with an Earth woman, but didn't take her back to Gore. I'm not wholly certain on this part. I don't remember it. Either way, when Tarl is all grown up, he gets whisked off to Gore. He actually ends up a slave for a time, too. So men can be slaves, but they're usually used more like draft animals than sex objects. Interspersed through these novels, John Norman will go on random philosophical rants about how women long to be collared and enslaved and how it's their natural place in the world. I must love you, my darlings, to actually look for a few of these quotes that properly portray this, because dear God, can the man go on about it. Be prepared for some really high-quality prose here, folks. First, from Savages of Gore. One might, in the case of a free woman, in deference to her modesty or dignity, avert one's gaze from her beauty. This consideration, of course, is seldom, if ever, accorded to a slave. One may examine her slowly and with care, and with attention to detail, and if one feels she deserves it, with open and unconcealed admiration. It is not unusual for a Gorean male, who tends to be uninhibited in such matters, to clap his hands or strike his thigh or shout with pleasure upon seeing a bared slave. These responses, which might be thought embarrassing or inappropriate in the case of a free woman, may fittingly be accorded, of course, to slaves, who are only lovely animals. Even in the case of free women, the Gorean male incidentally disdains to feign disinterest in female beauty. He, for better or worse, has not been made a victim of the glandular suppression and life-shortening psychosexual reductionism inflicted in varying degrees on so many males in more pathological cultures. His civilization has not been purchased at the price of his manhood. His culture has not been designed to deny nature, but, startlingly, perhaps, in some minds, to fulfill it. Now, from the Slave Girl of Gore. Or, well, Slave Girl of Gore. These titles don't generally have "the" in front of them. Free women are often cruel to beautiful female slaves. They put us under terrifying discipline. Perhaps they sense in us something of greater interest to men than themselves, something which constitutes to them a threat, something which is subtly competitive and successfully so to them. I do not know. Perhaps they fear us, or the slave in themselves. I do not know. Mostly I suspect the women were furious with me because I had been responsive to the touch of the auctioneer's whip. Free women, desiring to yield, pride themselves on their capacity not to yield, to maintain their quality and integrity. Slave girls, on the other hand, are not permitted such luxuries. They, whether they desire to yield or not, must yield, and totally. Perhaps free women wish they did not have to be free, and could relate in biological naturalness, like the slave girl to the dominant organism. Perhaps they wish they were slaves. I do not know. One thing is certain, and that is that there is a deep psychological hostility on the part of the free woman for her sister in bondage, particularly if she is beautiful. Slave girls accordingly fear free women. Slave girls want to be locked in the collars of men, not women. And finally, this gem from Prize of Gore. On the whole, however, Goreans tend to be remarkably free of vulgarity, perhaps because their world is, on the whole, so much more innocent, natural, and conducive to human happiness than at least one other world. There is thus a paradox of sorts which arises. The Gorean will often tend to be courteous and refined in his speech, and yet in action direct and forceful, sometimes even ruthless and brutal. We thus have the combination of a gentleman and an uncompromising master in one, with that of a slave and a lady in one. But then I suppose that this is not really so difficult to understand. If you are a male reading this, ask yourself what you would rather have at your slave ring, lying there naked and chained, looking up at you, cringing in the shadow of your whip, a simple, slovenly, vulgar-mouthed slut, or a highly intelligent, cultured, refined lady. These quotes pretty much sum up rather simply what Gore is. It is often said in Gorean chat rooms that Gore is harsh, Gore is cruel, Gore is Gore. There are also different castes on Gore, which have different standings. The warriors, initiates, who are basically the priests, builders, scribes, and physicians round out the high castes. They actually know of Earth and that people are brought from it. Women of these castes can practice their caste jobs, but they don't have to, because people of these castes can afford to keep their women lazy, so to speak. Some of the lower castes are merchants, slavers, tarn keepers, tarns being large birds that can actually be ridden, bakers, and peasants. Basically, most basic jobs have a caste attached to them. On physicians, though, Gore has extremely advanced technology as far as healing goes. They also have lighters and a concoction called slave wine that renders basically a woman sterile until she is given a second drink to counteract it. Free women have a similar drink. It's usually used on slaves, but when it's used by free women, it is sweetened so that it is not bitter to the taste. Oh, and it's not a romantic affair at all when slaves are bred. They're often put in a pen, hooded with a male slave, and yeah, it's basically like breeding animals, which is kind of what slaves are looked at as. The world of Gore, in and of itself, is rather fascinating. There are some animals on Gore that are similar to those on Earth. There are some, like giant spiders who wear translation boxes, that are sentient, but these are only in certain areas. There are also man-eating plants and no canine animals. In the books, men can essentially be however they wish. They're not considered unmanly if they write poetry, or if they plant flowers, or if they cry. Free women, however, are supposed to maintain their freedom by being frigid toward men. If they are not frigid, then they risk being enslaved, at which point they become a simple piece of property, supposedly worth less than a beast of burden, but sometimes considered more precious, as some men will actually fall in love with their slaves. However, it is the free women who bear free children, so the free women are kind of a necessity, I guess, in their culture. I don't know. Now, that was just a brief summary of everything that Gore is. Here are some of the differences between the books and online roleplay of the books. In the books, slaves account for less than 10% of the population. Basically, I believe it was said that less than 1 in 40 women are enslaved, yet online that is mostly what you'll find. There is probably a twofold reason for this. While there is more dynamic roleplay to be had playing an aloof, frigid free woman, when it comes to relationships which are popular in roleplay, remaining frigid becomes difficult and frustrating and kind of boring, and it makes it very difficult for people to enjoy their relationship roleplay. And it can be rather less fun than just letting go and doing your best with abandon. It could be interesting holding back if you like the drama of a free woman being in love with her partner, but being unable to fully express it. But that would probably get boring to a number of players after a while. When I started, there were lifestylers in the chat rooms, and many of the people who played in Gore didn't view it as playing. Most of them legitimately viewed it as a lifestyle, and not only a lifestyle, but that Gore was a real place. These are the types who would look down on the lowly role player. Thus, we have come full circle to the beginning of what I said. Because these Goreans did not play their roles, they lived them. I liked the roleplay potential, but not if every man wanted to pretend like he was uber-strong Tarl Cabot of Earth, stronger than regular men on Gore, and willing and able to collar any woman who gives him lip. There is a lot more to Gore than what is roleplayed online, which is a shame because it can be a fascinating world, if you can get past the gender politics. As an aside, the Pawnee I mentioned earlier are the only group to have a third class of women. This class is called contract women. The Pawnee are the equivalent of old Japan, and contract women are the equivalent to geisha. They are owned through contracts, are taught to be feminine and beautiful to entertain men, but they are actually respected, not quite as much as free women, but leaps and bounds more than slaves. And they, unlike free women, may express their own desire, albeit subtly, and are allowed to enjoy things without fear of a collar because it is their job to please. In fact, I'll add another quote here to offer a bit of insight into the difference. From Swordsman of Gore. They were not collar girls. Indeed, they regarded themselves, without arrogance, and with much justification, as far superior to collar girls. They were, in their view, in a different category altogether. The collar girl was an animal who might be put to the straw in a stable, and would not even be permitted within the refined precincts of the pleasure house. The collar girl was ignorant of the simplest things, even the proper serving of tea, the careful, delicate, symbolic arrangements of flowers and such. She would be of little interest to a gentleman, save for her performance of lengthy, servile labors, and her squirmings, gaspings, moanings, thrashings, and beggings, perhaps back-braceleted in his arms. Certainly the contract women knew the attractions of simple collar girls for males, but they did not regard them as rivals. When, wearied of a world's concerns, he wished to spend a leisurely, elegant evening gratifying his various cultivated senses, physical, intellectual, and aesthetic, his choice would not be the collar girl, but the women trained to comfort and delight him in traditional and cultural manners. So, yeah, the contract women are a different beast as well. So, this is basically a seriously basic summary of what Gore and Gore Online is. If you want to learn more, there are plenty of sites about it. I will have a few links down in the description. If it appeals to you, hey, I can't blame you, because I kind of have a love-hate relationship. Well, not love-hate. It's more like an off and on relationship, like, you know it's bad for you, but you keep going back. Yeah, it's kind of like that, because I realize I don't like it, the way it's played, and then I quit it for a while, and then I'm like, oh, I might like it again. No. So, off and on over the years. I will also list sites that have chat rooms based on Gore in the description below. So, if you want to check it out, check it out. Until then, have fun, my darlings.